The night was calm, the kind of quiet evening where the streets seemed empty, and only the glow of street lights guided the way. The army general sat behind the wheel of his official car, dressed in full uniform. The medals on his chest reflected the faint light each time he passed under a lamp. His posture was straight, his movements steady, the way years of discipline had trained him. He had served his country in many parts of the world, yet nothing about this night suggested he would need the same calmness and courage on his own streets. He was only a few miles from home, driving through a small town where he had no enemies and no reason to expect trouble. As the car rolled forward, headlights appeared in his rear-view mirror. A police cruiser pulled up close, following tightly. At first, he thought little of it. He was on the main road, and perhaps the officer simply needed to pass. But when the flashing red and blue lights came alive, his calm expression remained, though he was puzzled. He checked his speedometer. He was well within the limit. The car tags were current, the vehicle spotless, and everything about his driving was proper. Still, the sirens and lights demanded him to pull over. The general eased the car to the side of the road, as carefully as protocol demanded. He signaled, slowed, and parked neatly along the curb. He placed his hands on the wheel and took a slow breath, reminding himself that even in ordinary situations, patience was always his greatest ally. He had dealt with stress under gunfire in distant lands. This, he believed, was just a routine stop. Yet something inside him whispered that the night carried more weight than it seemed. The police cruiser came to a stop behind him. For a moment, nothing happened. The lights kept flashing, painting the night in red and blue, casting shadows across the buildings nearby. The general could see his reflection faintly in the windshield, a calm figure waiting with steady eyes. Then the car door opened, and out stepped a police officer. His stride was heavy, almost aggressive, his hand resting too close to his holster as he approached. There was no greeting, no polite tone of duty. Instead, his first words came sharp, cutting the silence of the night. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer barked. The general turned his head slightly, keeping his voice even and polite. "Officer, may I ask the reason for this stop?" His tone was not confrontational but firm, the tone of someone used to giving orders but choosing respect. The officer ignored the question, stepping closer, his flashlight beam sweeping over the interior of the car, lingering on the uniform and the medals. Instead of showing recognition, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I said step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." The general did not move quickly. Every decision had to be measured. He knew sudden actions, even innocent ones, could be misread. Slowly, he raised his hands slightly higher on the wheel to make them visible. "Officer, I am a serving general in the United States Army. I have not violated any law. My identification is on me. I will comply, but I ask again, for what reason am I being stopped?" The words carried dignity, but they seemed to fall against a wall. The officer shifted, restless, as if patience was a burden. His hand twitched again near his holster, the shine of the firearm visible under the light. The general remained motionless, his discipline holding firm. He had been in tense negotiations overseas, had faced enemy lines, and knew that silence sometimes carried more danger than noise. From across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone had noticed the flashing lights and peered out. Then another window opened. Within minutes, a handful of people were watching quietly, sensing that something about this stop was different. The uniform was visible even from a distance. Some of them whispered to one another, recognizing the decorated man sitting calmly behind the wheel, a man who had often appeared in the town's news during ceremonies and parades. Inside the car, the general measured the officer's face. He could read people, it was part of his career, part of survival. What he saw was not curiosity or respect. It was suspicion, growing sharper with each second. He repeated calmly, "I am unarmed." My rank and position are clear. Please allow me to provide my identification in a safe manner. But the officer's voice rose instead of calming. Don't make sudden moves. Don't test me. The general's chest rose slowly with a breath. He was not angry. He could not afford anger. His life had been built on restraint, on the ability to remain steady while others faltered. Still, his mind moved quickly. He thought of the many soldiers he had commanded, young men and women who trusted him to protect them. He thought of the country he had sworn to defend, the flag stitched onto his uniform that now seemed invisible to the man standing outside his window. And he thought of the weight of silence, the way an ordinary street could become a battlefield without warning. The crowd across the street grew. A teenager quietly raised his phone and began recording. Another whispered to a friend, "That's the general. That's him. Why is he being stopped?" Confusion rippled through the small group. They could sense the sharpness in the officer's tone, see the unnecessary stiffness in his posture. They exchanged nervous glances, knowing instinctively that the moment could turn dangerous. The general finally spoke again, his voice steady. "Officer, I respect your duty. I will follow instructions. I only ask you to recognize that I am a senior officer in uniform, and I am cooperating fully." His words were carefully chosen, not to challenge but to remind. They carried the weight of experience, of decades of service, of medals that were not just decorations but stories of sacrifice. But the night remained tense, the silence between words stretching longer. The officer shifted again, his flashlight still fixed on the general, as though searching for a flaw that was not there. The general kept his hands visible, his body unmoving. He understood that patience was the only shield he had in that moment. A simple drive home had turned into a test of dignity. The crowd's quiet murmurs carried across the street, a reminder that witnesses now stood between the darkness and truth. And still, the night held its breath. The night air was cool, yet the tension surrounding the stopped car was heavy and thick. The general remained seated inside his vehicle, hands still visible on the steering wheel, his body still, his mind steady. He had learned long ago that calmness could turn chaos into order. Yet here, calmness was mistaken for something else. The officer outside the car shifted restlessly, his stance sharp and unyielding, his voice already louder than it needed to be. "Step out now," the officer demanded again, his flashlight beam cutting across the general's face. The general turned his head slightly, the medals on his uniform glinting under the streetlight. His words were measured, soft enough to show control but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Officer, I will step out. But I want to be certain this is safe. I will follow procedure." The officer's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his holster as if every second stretched his patience thinner. To him, the general's calmness was not discipline but defiance. He could not see the years of leadership written in the man's eyes, nor the honor stitched into his uniform. All he saw was a challenge, a figure not reacting with fear, and that only fueled his suspicion. Slowly, the general pushed the car door open with the edge of his hand. He made sure every motion was clear and deliberate, leaving no chance for misunderstanding. His boots touched the pavement, polished from duty and tradition, now standing on a small town road that had turned into a stage of judgment. He straightened, his posture tall, shoulders broad, the same stance that had commanded respect in war zones and ceremonies. The crowd across the street leaned forward. They could feel the weight of the moment, the sharpness in the air. Phones were raised higher, recording each second, the red and blue lights flashing across their lenses. Some whispered that this was not how a stop should be handled, that the man in uniform deserved recognition, not suspicion. The officer stepped closer, his words clipped. "Hands where I can see them. Turn around. Don't make any sudden moves." The general did as instructed. His hands remained high, his movements deliberate. But his voice carried a calm authority that could not be hidden. "I am General of the United States Army. My identification is inside my jacket pocket. I will retrieve it only when you allow. The officer sneered slightly, as though the words carried no meaning. To him, titles were excuses, uniforms were costumes, and calmness was arrogance. His hand twitched again, brushing against the grip of his weapon. The general did not flinch. He had faced far more dangerous standoffs in his career. Yet this one, on his own homeland, under his own flag, felt heavier than any he had endured abroad. The crowd grew restless. A woman whispered, "That's really him. I saw him at the memorial last year." Another man nodded, his voice low but firm. "This isn't right. He's earned respect." The murmurs spread like ripples, though none dared to step closer. They knew how fragile the scene was, how one wrong step could ignite something irreversible. The officer's voice rose again. "On your knees. Now." The general's chest lifted with a deep breath. He kept his gaze forward, his tone steady. "Officer, I have complied with every instruction. I am not resisting. I will not endanger myself or you. But I am not a threat, and I will not act as one." The words carried both dignity and restraint, the voice of someone who had stood before soldiers in moments of fear and given them courage. Yet to the officer, the refusal to kneel was defiance. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the police cruiser's engine and the faint buzz of streetlights. The general stood tall, hands visible, his figure framed against the flashing lights. His calmness was not weakness but strength, a strength that unsettled the man aiming suspicion at him. For the officer, control meant fear. For the general, control meant dignity. The clash of those two beliefs painted the air with danger. A bead of sweat rolled down the officer's temple as his frustration deepened. He had expected fear, trembling, obedience. Instead, he faced composure. It unnerved him. His hand, restless, finally moved. The crowd gasped as he reached fully for his firearm, pulling it free from its holster in one swift motion. The general did not flinch. His eyes fixed on the weapon, then on the officer's face. His voice, low but steady, cut through the tension. "Think carefully about what you are doing. You are aiming at a man who has defended this country for decades, who stands here unarmed, compliant, and in uniform. Do not make a mistake that will haunt you." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The crowd's whispers hushed into nothing. Phones recorded the standoff, their lenses capturing a decorated officer standing tall, and a man in authority trembling with his own choices. The general's body language was calm, but his mind raced. He remembered the many battles overseas, where decisions had to be made in seconds. He remembered the soldiers who had looked to him for guidance, their lives in his hands. And now, here he stood, his own life dependent on the restraint of someone who could not see past his own prejudice. The officer's hand tightened around the gun. His breathing was uneven, his voice harsh as he barked, "Don't move." The general did not move. He stood still, his voice the only anchor in the storm. "I am not your enemy. I am not resisting. Lower your weapon. You still have the chance to do the right thing." Every word was chosen carefully, spoken with the clarity of a man who knew that one slip, one wrong tone, could decide everything. His eyes never wavered, his shoulders remained square. To the watching crowd, he looked like a statue of discipline, a man unbroken by fear. The phones continued recording. The witnesses continued holding their breath. The street remained heavy with silence, broken only by the flashing lights that painted everything in restless colors. The officer's weapon stayed raised, but his expression faltered, doubt flickering for the first time as the crowd's whispers grew louder again. The general had not shouted, had not argued, had not resisted. He had simply stood, calm and steady, letting the weight of his truth press against the officer's weakness. And in that moment, everyone watching could see who truly held control. The night stretched on, fragile, each second dragging like a heavy chain. The officer's finger twitched on the trigger, but his eyes betrayed him. He was uncertain. The general's words echoed in his ears, louder than the crowd, louder than the silence. And so the standoff continued, the general's patience the only shield between calm and chaos. The officer's gun was raised, its barrel pointed directly at the general's chest. The flashing red and blue lights bounced across his uniform, catching the shine of metals that represented years of service, courage, and sacrifice. The air was so tense that even the wind seemed to stop moving. Every eye in the crowd was fixed on the two men, one standing calm and dignified, the other trembling with a weapon he never should have drawn. The general did not blink. His training had prepared him for chaos, for moments when one wrong move could mean disaster. His voice, steady and calm, filled the silence. "Officer, you are making a mistake. I have obeyed every command. I am unarmed, and I am not resisting. You do not need that weapon." The officer's breathing was uneven. His eyes darted around, as if trying to find justification for the choice he had already made. The more the general remained calm, the more it shook him. He had expected panic, raised voices, or pleading. Instead, he faced a man who stood tall, unflinching, as though the gun was nothing more than a shadow. Gasps spread through the crowd as a few more phones were lifted, their cameras zooming in on the gun. A teenager whispered to his friend, "He's going to do it? He's really going to do it?" The friend shook his head nervously. "No, he can't. That's the general." The tension was contagious, traveling from one bystander to another until everyone felt the weight pressing down on them. The general did not allow fear to show. He had faced fire before, in deserts, jungles, and mountains. He had stood before enemies who wanted nothing more than to silence him. And now, on a quiet street in his own country, he faced a different kind of battle. His calmness was his weapon, his composure his shield. His words came again, quiet but powerful. "Think of what you are about to do. The badge on your chest carries responsibility. The gun in your hand is meant for protection, not for fear. Lower it before this becomes a mistake too great to erase." The officer's grip tightened, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Sweat rolled down his temple, catching in the collar of his shirt. His face twitched with indecision. For a moment, it looked as though he would fire, but then hesitation stopped him. The general's stillness unnerved him. It was like staring into a mirror that revealed his own weakness. The crowd was no longer silent. Murmurs rippled louder, voices carrying across the street. "He's a general. He's unarmed," someone shouted. Another called out, "Put the gun down." The voices only made the officer more unsettled. He turned his head briefly toward the crowd, the weapon still pointed forward, his pride now at war with his fear. The general used the moment. His tone sharpened, not with anger but with authority. "Officer, look at me. Not at them. At me. I am no threat to you. You are pointing a gun at a man who has given his life to this country. I stand here in uniform. You know this is wrong." The words hit like iron. The officer's eyes flicked back to him, the doubt plain now. Yet pride held him frozen. He could not lower the gun without admitting fault. His jaw tightened, his arm stiffened, but his heart raced with the realization of what he had done. The general remained unmoving. His hands stayed raised, his body language open and calm. He knew that sudden moves could tip the balance. He relied instead on the strength of words, the strength of presence. Every second he stood without fear was a lesson to the crowd, and a mirror to the man before him. Phones continued recording. The glow of screens lit up the faces of witnesses, each video capturing the trembling gun, the steady officer, and the decorated soldier standing firm. In homes across the street, lights flicked on as more people came to their windows. The scene had grown larger, heavier, impossible to ignore. A young boy held onto his mother's hand tightly. "Why is he pointing the gun at the soldier?" he asked softly. The mother shook her head, her voice breaking. "Because sometimes people forget who they're really looking at." The general heard nothing but the breathing of the man before him, loud and uneven. His focus was locked. He had to hold this moment steady, to ensure that no one moved in panic. His patience stretched like steel. He spoke once more, his tone low but commanding. "You still have a choice. Lower the weapon. Show discipline. Do not let this moment define you." The words struck harder than any shout could. The officer's hand shook slightly, the gun wavering. His pride told him to stand firm, but every second made the weapon feel heavier. The crowd's voices grew louder, their calls echoing against the quiet buildings. "Lower it. He's not a threat. Do your job the right way." For the first time, the officer looked uncertain, truly uncertain. His eyes darted between the general and the crowd. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. His authority was slipping, and the weight of his mistake was beginning to press on him. The general did not let the silence go to waste. His voice came steady, strong, like a command on a battlefield. "Stand down." The officer's arm faltered. The gun dipped slightly before he yanked it back up again, unwilling to yield fully. His pride clashed with the truth. His breathing grew harsher. His entire posture betrayed the storm inside him. The general never wavered. He held his ground, his uniform glowing under the harsh lights, his medals silent witnesses to his life of service. He had not raised a hand, had not taken a step, and yet he held complete control of the moment. The crowd could see it, the officer could feel it, and the cameras captured it all. The night stretched, each second dragging slower than the last. The general's calm was a wall, unbroken, unshaken. The officer's trembling grip revealed the truth that he was the one cornered, not the man he aimed at. And then the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, faint at first, then growing louder. Backup was arriving. The officer's eyes widened slightly, knowing what that meant. Witnesses were one thing. Fellow officers were another. He was about to be seen, judged not just by strangers but by his own. The general remained tall, his voice calm as the sound of engines approached. "You still have a chance. Do not waste it." The flashing red and blue lights from the approaching cars blended with the ones already circling the scene. The officer's gun still hung in the air, but his arm trembled more now. His pride, his fear, and his mistake all collided in that single moment, just as help arrived. And the night held its breath again, waiting for what came next. The sound of more sirens echoed down the street, their wails growing louder with each passing second. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising as the flashing lights of additional police cruisers came into view. Tires screeched softly as the backup units pulled in behind the first cruiser, their headlights spilling across the tense scene. The officer with the raised gun stiffened, his jaw tightening as he realized he was no longer in control of the situation. The general remained where he stood, hands visible, his body calm, his breathing steady. He had not moved since the moment the weapon had been drawn. The years of discipline that shaped him held strong, and though the barrel of the gun still pointed at his chest, his expression did not waver. He looked as though he had expected this moment all along. Doors slammed as the other officers stepped out quickly. The first of them froze mid-stride when he saw who was standing in the middle of the flashing lights. His eyes widened, recognizing the uniform, the face, and the medals that glittered under the sharp beams. He had seen the general before on television, at public ceremonies, even in the town's newspapers. The realization hit him like a sudden wave. "Hold fire," he shouted, his voice cutting across the tension like a blade. "Lower your weapon." The crowd gasped as the new command rang out. People raised their phones higher, eager to capture every second. The original officer's grip faltered, his hand trembling as he glanced at the new arrivals. The truth of his mistake was sinking in. He was no longer in charge of the scene. His authority was crumbling in front of witnesses, cameras, and now his fellow officers. The supervising officer, a tall man with a clear, commanding presence,